Now, India and Canada's diplomatic ties are not at its best. There's been repeated to and fro's between the top officials and leaders of the two nations, particularly with India claiming that they have not been acting adequately, or rather they have been acting inadequately against anti-India forces. A lot of this also has to do with the political vote bank in Canada. And now, there's an innately domestic issue that may impact lakhs of Indian students and may have diplomatic implications as well. We're talking about Canada's housing crisis. Immigration Minister Marc Miller, in an interview to CTV, has said Canada is considering a cap on the number of international students allowed to live in Canada, even as Canada reports record immigration. 2023 saw record-breaking numbers. Why is this important for Indian students? Well, for starters, India has the highest number of foreign students studying in Canada, almost 40%. Look at this chart. Students from China are a distant 12%. And in Canada, France, Iran and Nigeria are at a very distant third, at just about 3% population of foreign students studying in the country. And often revenues speak loudest. International students contributed to around 22.3 billion to the Canadian economy in the latest estimate. And around $10.2 billion, almost half of the total revenue Canada gets from foreign students, is from Indian students who are studying there. So setting a cap or axing students will not only have an impact on Canada, but also India. Canada is the third preferred choice for Indian students after US and UK. And I'm being joined right now by Ujjal Dosanjh, who was the former health minister for Canada. Thank you very much, sir, for joining us. My first question to you is, could you put this in the larger picture for us? How much of a crisis is this? And how much of a voting issue really is this crisis right now?
It is. It's an issue that affects the economy, affects housing, and also affects in terms of the integration of newcomers coming into the country. And it is impacting attitudes on immigration generally. Canada has been a very welcoming country in terms of immigrants from all over the world. I'm an immigrant myself here. But this current crisis that has blossomed into a large-scale housing crisis, as well as placements of local students in universities and colleges, because what happens is that some of the institutions give preference to foreign students because they bring in more money in terms of larger and higher fees, and the local students get shut out. So there is the building of that resentment, both in terms of the housing crisis and the lack of spaces for local students. And that, in fact, is having a negative effect on Canadians' attitudes towards immigrants generally. And, you know, it's a misnomer to say students are students. Most of the students that are coming from countries like India are, in fact, prospective immigrants. Very few of them ever go back. Therefore, in fact, you should add the number of students to the number of other immigrants coming to the country, and you are actually hitting almost 1 million people a year. For a country of 40 million to accommodate and integrate another million every year is a difficult issue, and it's creating social tensions, economic
Mr. Dosanjh,
issues,
allow me to
crisis.
interrupt at you just for what you're mentioning. Wasn't that really the policy that Canadian government pursued very actively with the aging population of Canada? Wasn't the policy all about giving impetus to students who would come to Canada and study and be given prospects of then settling into Canada, adding to the workforce, to the revenue? Wasn't that an actively followed policy of the Canadian government for a very long time?
Oh, absolutely. But I think that the government of Canada, many Canadians feel, have actually gone overboard in that policy, that they are bringing in people in much larger numbers than Canada can absorb in terms of both the housing opportunities and educational opportunities for the locals who are already here. And that's building a degree of resentment against foreigners coming into the country, taking university and college positions, and creating a housing crisis. And government, I mean, you do one thing and you have a reaction, and the reaction now is quite negative, and the government itself is suffering in the polls on other issues as well, high interest rates and the like, and the government is taking another look at the policy. And so that it's a bit of a political crisis.
Mr. Dosanjh?
Yes?
Mr. Dosanjh, how would you, as a political party, as somebody who has been a minister, see the recent statements by Mr. Miller to the CTV? How would you see when he's saying that they are looking at capping the number of students who would be internationally coming in? How is that being taken politically? Is that something that is playing to the gallery, that is being welcomed within Canada?
Oh, I think there's a large segment of the population in Canada is saying you finally come to your senses. You can't be bringing in 1 million people into the country, can't absorb the economic opportunities, and the housing isn't enough to accommodate all that. And you have had problems with Indian students and others who have had to sleep under the bridges and the like. I mean, or at various train stations, underground train stations. And that's really not something Canadians like very much. And I think Canadians are generally afraid, those who are thinking about these issues, that if we don't deal with this properly, we could turn other Canadians into sort of somewhat anti-immigrant Canadians, and whereas Canadians generally have been very welcoming for immigrants.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Dosanjh, for joining us and bringing in the perspective from Canada. This perhaps is going to be a huge sticky point between India and Canadian relations as well, which is not really doing great in terms of diplomatic ties. But let's just take this forward and try and get you different perspectives as well on this issue. I'm being joined by Terry Mirwiski, who's an author, also a former CBS journalist. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm also being joined by Manju Sharma, who is a senior university guidance counselor, B.D. Somani International School, as well as Suresh Goyal, who is a former ambassador, and Pathikrit Payan, who is a geopolitical analyst. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining. I'm not very sure, Pathikrit, if I've pronounced your surname correctly, but let me just start off with you, Mr. Suresh Goyal. Is this now, this whole housing crisis of Canada, with the latest statement of what Mr. Miller has spoken, and the larger picture that may emerge in days to come, if at all there's a cap to international students, would this now add another layer to how India and Canada would view their diplomatic relations?
My counter question would be, why should it, after all? I mean, on the one hand, we say that the Indian students, when they go to Canada, they are actually supporting the Canadian economy. Now, the Canadian government says that because there is a shortage of housing in Canada, and therefore they are going to cap the number of international students, I'm not defending the Canadians, but please look at it from even our point of view. And our point of view would be that it's not really that they're saying that Indians are going to be limited. A total number of international students is going to be limited to be able to manage their housing situation there. Now, my own son has studied in Canada. He also had to look for his own housing once he came to the second year. Even before that, there was no accommodation on the campus itself. And I'm talking about 10 years ago, and or more than 10 years. And they were actually put up in a hotel, like in a hostel kind of a format for the first year. But after the first year, they were all expected to really find their own accommodation, etc., etc. Now, if there is a problem about finding the housing, either they will sleep on the railway stations, in the tube, etc., etc., which is not a welcome situation, or they should not go there. And frankly speaking, Canada needs the Indian students as much as the Indian student, they may want to go to Canada. And therefore, I would simply say that if Canadian universities do not have facilities enough to accommodate international students, they should not go there. Simple as that. And therefore, we should not really make it a foreign policy.
Right.
We should make it an issue of what is available
All right.
and what is not available. Things cannot be created overnight. I know.
All right.
From
Thank
ICCR,
you, sir.
when I was DG ICCR, we were looking after students, foreign students in India. And we were going after the universities to create accommodation facilities for the international student. But they could not do it all at the same time. And therefore, we had to limit the
Ambassador Suresh Goyal, you've made a very important point.
Available.
Fair enough. No, absolutely. This has to be looked at beyond the lens of just about a diplomatic relation. This is so much more complex than that as well. Let me just get in Ms. Manju Sharma. I would like to take everybody's introductory remarks also on this. But Ms. Manju Sharma, if I can get you in to what Mr. Suresh Goyal is saying. If you are not welcome there, if you can't go there, don't go there. But is it as simple as that? Because if I'm looking at the numbers, the number of students, the foreign students has more than 4 times increased in just about 10 years. In Canada, it's a record high, perhaps of the last 70 years. 40% of students, foreign students make up from in Canada are from India. These are huge numbers. Is it as simple to say that if you're not getting it there, don't go there? I mean, if it can't be provided for you, don't go there. They are getting admissions, technically, legally speaking. How are you looking at this issue since you deal with so many students and colleges?
Yeah, so Canada had always been welcoming actually, and all the universities are very supportive. In fact, just this Friday we had a president from Huron University coming to our school, and then a gathering of counselors were there in Mumbai. And still the president is in India and meeting so many counselors, and is going to meet the embassy of Canada in India also. And universities are welcoming. They are saying that, yes, we do not have any issues. And when we have spoken to the students who are there, they are not actually, they are getting the support of the universities. But at the same time, like these geopolitical issues are there, which are created by the government. The universities also can't do anything in that. They are also supporting the students and are talking to the high commissions and government over there. But if this situation is going on, this is
no. So Manju, what are you listening? Is this interview by Mr. Miller? And frankly, it's not just an interview about the Miller. Mr. Miller seems to have come out in public now, but this has been an ongoing political demand for a very long time about keeping a cap to students, foreign students who would be coming to Canada. But over the last 24 hours, has it found resonance with universities? In the sense, is it being discussed on campuses? Are Indian students, their families calling you up? Are universities discussing them? Is it becoming an issue?
Yes, absolutely. It's becoming an issue because parents are really worried that is everything okay with their kids over there? Are they safe? They are provided all the facilities or not. And universities are also discussing, they are reaching out to the families also. They are inviting these students for dinner and lunch also. They're providing them counseling sessions as well. They are also worried. The universities are also worried about it. At the same time, the students who are applying now to the universities are discouraged to apply. Their families are concerned that, we do not want them
discouraged
to
by
apply
whom?
to
Discouraged by whom? Discouraged by whom, ma'am?
Parents. So parents are discouraging, and in fact, I'm a counselor and the other counselor also, because now we are also not confident, telling the students, no, you should apply to Canada. You have, post-study work visa also. You can work over there. You can stay over there. Because these are the concerns of the safety of the student, their well-being over there, whether they will really get good housing or not. They will, be safe over there or not. They will get the jobs also a lot. Whether this will be
Manju ma'am, I'll get back to you, Ms. Manju Sharma. I'll get back to you on this. Let me just get other remarks as well on this. Terry Milwiski, thank you for joining us. My one question to you would be, what would be the larger picture for this? Because if you look at the numbers only are surging. But is this also a growing sense of politicking with elections round the corner in Canada as well, with threats for the government? Within the government, you have voices that are now demanding to ensure that there is a limit on foreign students that is coming in. Is it a form of politicking before the elections, or is it something far more deeper?
The answer is yes. There is definitely politicking going on here. Look, there is an unpleasant odor about this proposal by the minister, Mr. Miller, of immigration. He's musing in public. I believe this is not unknown to happen with government ministers in India too, where they're floating a policy to see what the reaction might be. Well, there are two reasons why he might pull back from this. The first, obviously, is the unpleasant odor of blaming immigrants for Canada's housing crisis. Indian students are not to blame for Canada's housing crisis. It's a total imbalance between supply and demand is what's at the root of this. The minister himself says the immigration system is, and I'm quoting him, out of control. I think if the minister in charge of the file says it's out of control, we should believe him. The second reason I would offer for why I don't think he's going to go very far with this musing about this policy, and that is that this is a damn good business for Canada. This is worth billions. This is a multi-billion-dollar business for Canada, bringing in foreign students. And yes, Indian students are the lion's share. The latest numbers, I'm speaking now of Indian students living in Canada as students, not the ones that have already decided to stay and become permanent immigrants. There's about 216,000 Indians, students from India, and 580 in total. That means that India is more than a third, is 37% of all of the Indian students living in Canada now. And that contributes, as you've already reported, billions of dollars to the Canadian economy, not just the fees, but of course the very high rents they are forced to pay by the housing crisis. That's the problem. It's not that you can't get anywhere to live, it's that you can't afford it. And now the minister is also musing, by the way, about increasing the financial resources that students will have to show in order to get a visa to come and study in Canada. Now they're going to have to show 20,000 Canadian dollars. It used to be 10. Well, that's a big jump, and it's going to clamp down on it. But as I say, I don't think Canadians really want to blame immigrants for the housing crisis, considering that this is a nation of immigrants. I'm an immigrant.
Right.
You just spoke to my friend Ujjal Dosanjh. He's an immigrant. We're all immigrants in Canada. There weren't many people here when the Europeans arrived.
Right.
And it's not full yet. Canada has set a target of 500,000 immigrants. They're already running ahead of that pace. That's what the minister's talking about when he says it's out of control. But this proposal that brings us here today, that we should put a cap on the number of Indian students, I'll believe it when I see it, is my answer.
That will be interesting. That's very interesting voice coming in from Canada. Thank you very much. But also, if I can get in Mr. Patikrit Payne at this time. Mr. Patikrit, looking at the geopolitics, this is not a challenge. What's happening in Canada is not the only challenge for Indian students who really want to be studying outside. There's an entire immigration row which is unfolding in UK. There have been very strong policy statements coming out from UK that really don't signal well for Indian job seekers or Indian students as well there. Again, you have another issue boiling up in US. And if you look at the countries that Indians prefer most, or at least Indian students prefer the most, and we have the data, if we can have that graphics up also, it's US, UK, Canada, Australia, Germany. And bulk of these countries now seem to be having some policies or the other that are becoming controversial with respect to Indian students who want to go there. How do you explain this?
Thank you. See, first of all, I think these countries are sovereign countries. They have the right to take decisions which is in the larger interest of their citizens and their people.
Absolutely.
So we can't expect that whether it's Canada or UK will perpetually continue with a policy where Indians go and study there and with the hope of getting a permanent residency and then eventually a job. That's not the purpose of getting education there. See, frankly, if you ask me, I had my post-graduation in Singapore. If you talk about options, those who go to Canada or UK, they can look at many other options in Asia and even in India. Frankly, in the next 5 to 10 years, a lot is going to change in India when it comes to universities coming up in the private sector, foreign universities setting up shops. Secondly, as a theater of global economic activity shifts towards Asia, I think there's a lot of restriction, lot of limitation as to how many jobs can actually be created, whether it is in Canada or UK or Germany. So invariably, there would be backlash from the locals who don't want the immigrants to come and educate themselves and then get a job and permanently stay over there. We have to accept this reality. We would also, illegal immigration is an issue in India also. I'm not saying they're illegal immigrants, but we don't want the Sri Lankans or the Pakistanis or somebody else to come and take Indian jobs. So I think this is a reality we have to step in. If you purely talk about Canada, I want to say something. It might look a little controversial. I have never considered, barring a few institutes, I have never considered Canada as a center of academic excellence. People actually have been putting their ancestral properties on the block to go to Canada for the sake of getting a PR status. And eventually some of them end up working as truck drivers and in the restaurants. So that is not the kind of career anybody wants. So there is a lot of illusion around going abroad, becoming an NRI.
What do you suggest would be the top alternatives for Indian students who want to study abroad, say in the next 5 to 10 years? What would be the top alternatives? Do we have anything to back this up? Are there any the top 5 alternates that may really emerge? Do we have anything on that?
If you ask me today, purely from the perspective of economic prospects, I think Singapore is a great place. Even Hong Kong you can consider as a great place. Australia can be considered as a great place. And further, why not India? Why do you need to go abroad? I mean, of course, it's a personal choice. But if you purely ask about prospects of studying and getting, it's ultimately a cost benefit analysis. The amount of money that you spend in Canada for getting a degree, I don't think you can actually earn that much, and it takes almost decades for a lot of people to earn that much money. That's what I'm saying.
Very interesting take. Let me just get in Mr. Suresh Goyal. Very interesting take. Let me just get in Ambassador Suresh Goyal. Ambassador Suresh Goyal, of course, a lot has changed. But do you think India is ready for Make in India, academically rich, aspiring students who can then take on the global market? And I know we have institutions of excellence. We have great number of them. But do we have enough capacity to churn out? I won't say all foreign universities churn out great quality education. I will not go by that misnomer. But at least for those who can manage great education outside, can we have that kind of a capacity within India to really handle that?
Sneha, let us look at the real economic spectrum here. You churn out, let us say, 20,000 graduates, or in fact, we churn out many more. We churn out practically about 2 million or 3 million or whatever it is every year, okay? Now, once they have completed graduation, 3 million, they look for employment, suitable jobs in the market here. And then you have a situation like in Bihar or in UP and the other places where there's a large number of people, students, who want to apply for the government jobs, even though there is no match between the qualifications they've got and the kind of jobs they're applying for. So really speaking, if you look at a match between the employment market and the kind of education we have, we always have had far many more people graduating than the employment market can absorb. And then you have the phenomenon of those people from Punjab and other places going to Canada, going to Australia, going to USA, different places where education is, or admission to a university is only a ruse for illegal immigration. We know that very well. In Australia, there are people who go for degrees like hair cutting. And basically, when they go there, they're actually looking for the job, PR. Therefore, I think we need to really do some introspection ourselves and see what is the purpose of the students going abroad for their education. If it is, yes, higher learning, we do have specialized learning, they must be given place. And I think in this case, I may agree with Canada. I don't
Ambassador Suresh, if it is not only education, Ambassador, and if it is for good money, for whatever jobs they are getting, what would be your answer for that then? That is also important. Families need to run.
If it is done in a proper manner, where there is a requirement for the job by all means. But nothing should be done which can actually become illegal in or against the principles and the
All
rules
right.
and regulations and the laws of the country.
All right, I have barely 7 minutes more left. Let me just take one last word from everybody. Ms. Manju, getting back to you on this. Now, you were mentioning about there have been more concerns. Indian families have been calling in. Universities have been trying to speak to them. Over the last how many months have you seen this kind of a spike, if at all I may say that? Can you just help us gauge the sense in the academic world there?
Yeah, so since this all issue had started, it came in the media, and then how, the parents who were actually planning that their kids will be applying to Canadian universities, and they had all plans, they have come up like, no, all this issue is going on now. We do not want our child to apply over there. It is better that they would be going to US, UK, or otherwise they can stay in India. So Canada, the applications have dipped like anything. The parents are not taking that interest applying over there, and all this had come because of this geopolitical issues out there. I want to ask Mr. Miller, like, how he is coming all of this suddenly, that they want to reduce this number of students, coming over there, whereas this is actually bringing a lot of revenue to their country. And at the same time, is it that the government just take the decision, so sudden for, they do not have any
Okay.
roadmap for their country? They do not plan things out there. How
Okay.
these, decisions are taken just at the surge of, anything? Do, don't they have any policy? Do not they have like, you know, where they have a vision? That they earlier they are inviting all
No,
these,
I understand
Canada
you are
has
quite
golden
visibly
population, they
troubled with
need
what's
younger
happening. I
generation.
understand.
And
Let me just get in. Right. No, let me just get in Mr. Terry. Mr. Terry, uh, while all may be said, there's also economics at play. And there's also demography at play. From what we have been reading, there has been a growing aging population of Canada. And for a long time, the Canadian policy has been to get in more students, particularly foreign students, who can then settle in, work there, develop, opportunities of revenue, and contribute to the Canadian system as well. Now, with the politicking that's happening, what do you see change? Do you see anything change, say, in next 5 years? There's, of course, elections coming in. There's vote bank happening. You're saying this. I mean, I'm hearing the sentiments are really strong in favor of what's being mooted by the minister. I don't know how much of that really translates on the ground.
Well, as I said earlier, I will believe it when I see it. I don't see the government going very far with this policy, because there's one thing we have to remember about the point that was quite correctly made by Ambassador Gall about a lot of people coming to study, allegedly to study, are actually here to immigrate to Canada. And they see it as a kind of a backdoor way to get in. Well, okay, but let's remember that Canadians shouldn't feel so bad about that, considering that we need those workers. I mean, if you look at one specific sector, for example, I'll just use one example. 32,000 new tech workers in Canada last year. 32,000 in this country. Half of those were from India. Now, the reason they have those jobs as tech workers is because those jobs are going begging. We need people to fill those jobs. And so it's not as though Canada is suffering somehow from people coming here to study and then using this back door to get in as permanent immigrants. Canada needs those workers.
All right.
And you're right to point out that we don't have the workers any other way. We're not going to get those workers any other way. The population is not reproducing itself fast enough to fill the growing need. So if half of those 32,000 are from India, then India's onto a good thing. They're going to have their people in good jobs in Canada, and it'll be good for Canada too, because they'll be paying taxes. And I don't think that Canadians are going to suddenly, because the minister is musing about a cap on Indian students, I don't think Canadians are going to say, yeah, we don't want these people coming here and
All right.
spending money and contributing their skills to Canada's future growing economy. I don't see it.
All right. All right, last question to you, Mr. Patikrit. And frankly, Indian students who are going there are not with begging bowls. They are paying through their noses for whatever reasons. It may be valid, may be invalid, it may be not to the best of institutions, fair enough. But having said that, is it now time across countries who are trying to bring in these immigration policies fairly according to their interest, is it now important for them to develop fairly demarcating boundaries that would differentiate between students who are trying to go there through very legitimate reasons, maybe to even get jobs, fair enough, but against what perhaps Ambassador was indicating would be for reasons that would not be in the best interest of the respective country? Is it now time for countries actually to be able to enforce that demarcation?
Of course, that demarcation is still there, because if you go for STEM and some of the higher end studies, they actually encourage, whether it's United States or other countries. I don't know whether Canada has that or not. But frankly speaking, my first reply to one issue is that this is not a foreign policy priority for India. I mean, I think it's a blessing in disguise.
Sure.
Secondly, these countries these are sovereign countries, they have their own government, they have the right to decide when it comes to jobs, that the locals would have the right. Of course, it's an election year. We don't know what's going to happen after the elections, whether policy will change or not. But eventually, I repeat,
Right.
people who are legitimately going for higher studies, if they are good enough, if the university considered them good enough, inducted. But let me tell you one thing: Canada's problem is a real problem. Right, 90% of Canadians live within 160 kilometers of United States border. So there is an issue. There is an issue of a crisis
Absolutely.
of housing. It cannot be sorted out. We cannot presume that the whole thing is just for the sake of election. May not be that this is an issue in other countries, but the immigrants coming and just staying there is not going to happen. I've seen people going to United States, doing postdoctorate, eventually have been asked to go back. And I think it's a fair policy from their perspective. I see nothing wrong from what they're doing. As I stated, economic growth is stagnating. That is an issue. The kind of growth the Americans or the Western countries had in the 80s and the 90s, it is no more there. So their ability to absorb immigrants is gradually coming.
Okay, we're totally out of time. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Patikrit. We are totally out of time. Thank you very much, all four of you, for joining us. You've brought in some very important perspectives into this very complex issue, which I am sure is going to have so many more layers that we'll have to unfold in months to come. Not only will it be what's happening in Canada, but also how it's going to impact people who are aspiring to study, not only abroad in Canada, but other nations as well. Thank you very much for joining us.